Gasping for air, my lungs filled with the toxic, suffocating smoke of the warehouse fire Tristan had trapped me in, my vision permanently faded to black, betrayed, utterly destroyed. Then a sharp intake of clean oxygen filled my chest, and my eyes snapped open to the glaring, blinding lights of a lavish bridal suite. Staring back at me in the ornate vanity mirror was a face untouched by burns, framed by a pristine white veil. Today was May 14th, the exact day I was condemned to marry the paralyzed, ruthless heir, Felix Dalton. Only this time, as I walked down the aisle, a cynical, deeply masculine voice echoed perfectly clear inside my head, and his lips weren't moving. Flames. That was all I could remember. The searing, agonizing heat of the flames licking at my skin, the mocking laughter of Tristan Belmont echoing from the other side of the heavy steel door, and Cassandra's clinking champagne glasses as they celebrated my murder. I had given Tristan everything. I had stolen the Dalton corporate secrets, funneled millions into Tristan's offshore accounts, and ruined my disabled husband, Felix, all because I believed Tristan's lies about a future together. Once I was no longer useful, they locked me in an abandoned textile factory and tossed a match. Yet, here I was. The heavy silk of my wedding gown weighed down my shoulders, the intricate lace bodice perfectly intact, the scent of white roses and expensive vanilla filled the air. I looked down at my hands, soft, unblemished, free from the soot and blistering burns of my death. "Jocelyn, you're up next. Do not mess this up," a sharp voice hissed. I turned slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. It was Cassandra, my supposed best friend. She looked pristine in her emerald bridesmaid dress, her eyes flashing with a familiar, manipulative calculation. In my past life, I had clung to her on this day, weeping about how my life was over because I was being forced to marry a cripple to save my family's failing enterprise. "I won't," I said, my voice shockingly steady. I didn't recognize the coldness in my own tone. The heavy mahogany doors of the cathedral swung open. The organ music swelled, reverberating through the stone arches. I stepped forward, gripping my bouquet of white peonies so tightly my knuckles turned white. At the end of the long, velvet-carpeted aisle sat Felix Dalton. Even confined to a custom-built, matte black wheelchair, the man commanded absolute authority. His broad shoulders filled out a tailored charcoal tuxedo that screamed generational wealth. His jawline was sharp enough to cut glass. His dark hair swept back, and his piercing gray eyes were locked onto me with an expression of absolute, terrifying indifference. The rumors about him were legendary. A ruthless titan of industry who had been paralyzed from the waist down in a mysterious car crash 3 years ago. Vicious, unforgiving. A monster, Tristan had called him. In my previous life, I hadn't looked him in the eye once during the ceremony. I had trembled, wept silently, and treated him like a leper. This time, I kept my chin high. I walked down that aisle not as a sacrificial lamb, but as a woman who had clawed her way back from hell. I reached the altar. The priest began his monotonous sermon. Felix didn't glance at me. His jaw was clenched tight, a muscle ticking near his ear. Then, completely out of nowhere, a deep, resonant voice echoed right between my ears. "She looks like an angel. A beautiful, terrified angel. God, I disgust her. She can't even look at me without wanting to run." I flinched, snapping my head to the left, then the right. Who said that? The guests in the front row were silent. The priest was reading from his Bible. "Look at her trembling," the voice continued. It was Felix's voice, but deeper, stripped of the icy, aristocratic drawl he used in public. Tristan Belmont put her up to this. "I know she's here to destroy my company. I know she's spying on me, but if she just smiled at me just once, I'd hand her the keys to my empire and let her burn it to the ground." My breath hitched. I stared directly at Felix. His lips were pressed into a thin, immovable line. He wasn't speaking. I was hearing his thoughts. The shock nearly buckled my knees. My mind raced, trying to process the absolute impossibility of it. Rebirth was one thing, but telepathy? And more importantly, the content of those thoughts. In my past life, I thought Felix despised me. I thought he was a tyrant who only married me for optics. But he knew? He knew about Tristan's plot from day one? And he was going to let me ruin him because he loved me? Do you, Felix Dalton, take Jocelyn to be your lawfully wedded wife? The priest asked. I do, Felix said aloud, his actual voice cold, clipped, and devoid of emotion. Even if it's only a cage of paper and lies, at least she's mine for a little while. Even if she hates me, his internal voice whispered, heavy with a grief that shattered my heart. Do you, Jocelyn, take Felix to be your lawfully wedded husband? I didn't hesitate. I didn't cry like I had the first time. I stepped closer to him, closing the deliberate gap he had left between us, and looked directly into his stormy gray eyes. I do. With all my heart, I said clearly. Felix's head snapped up, genuine shock flickering across his stoic features. What? His mind yelled. What did she just say? With all her heart? Is she a better actress than I thought? Or am I losing my damn mind? I offered him a soft, genuine smile. For the first time, I noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the subtle lines of chronic pain bracketing his mouth. He wasn't a monster. He was a man holding the weight of the world, silently enduring betrayal. I will protect you this time, Felix, I vowed in my own mind, hoping somehow he could hear me too. I will make them pay, and I will protect you. The grand ballroom of the Dalton estate was drowning in excess. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the hundreds of elite guests. Waiters glided through the crowd with silver trays of champagne and caviar. I sat at the sweetheart table next to Felix. The space between us was vast, a physical manifestation of the emotional wall he had built. In my previous life, I had abandoned him at this table within 10 minutes, fleeing to the gardens to secretly meet with Tristan. My legs are burning, Felix's voice echoed in my mind, layered with a tight, repressed agony. The nerve damage is spreading. Dr. Gregory said the pain would be manageable today, but it feels like shards of glass. I can't let her see me sweat. I can't look weak in front of her. I glanced at him. Outwardly, he looked completely composed, swirling a glass of scotch in his right hand, but I could see the white-knuckle grip of his left hand on the armrest of his wheelchair. Without a word, I reached under the long, draped tablecloth. I found his left hand, gently pried his stiff fingers from the metal armrest, and laced my fingers through his. His hand was freezing cold. Felix physically jolted. His scotch sloshed dangerously close to the rim of his glass. She's touching me, his inner voice stammered, entirely abandoning its cynical edge. Why is she touching me? Her skin is so warm. Is this part of Belmont's plan? Gain my trust by acting affectionate? Don't fall for it, Felix. Don't be an idiot. It's going to be a long night, I said softly, leaning closer so only he could hear. If you need to leave early, just tell me. We don't owe these people anything. He turned to me, his expression guarded. I am perfectly capable of enduring a dinner party, Jocelyn. Please don't pull your hand away, his mind pleaded. Just 5 more seconds. I tightened my grip, anchoring him. I know you are, but you don't have to endure anything for my sake. Before he could respond, a shadow fell over our table. Jocelyn. Felix. Congratulations. It was Tristan. He wore a custom navy suit, his blonde hair styled to perfection. He had the kind of conventionally handsome face that hid a rotting, putrid soul perfectly. Seeing him, the man who had literally watched me burn to death, sent a violent shockwave of nausea and rage through my system. I wanted to grab the steak knife on the table and drive it through his perfectly straight white teeth. Tristan, Felix said, his voice dropping to a glacial, menacing octave. I should have security throw him through a window. The way he looks at her, he thinks he owns her. A beautiful ceremony, Tristan smoothly lied, his eyes darting to me with a silent, commanding expectation. It was the signal. In my past life, this was when I excused myself to meet him in the rose garden. I need a moment with the bride, Felix, if you don't mind. An old family friend passing on her father's regards, Tristan said smoothly. Felix's jaw locked. She's going to go with him. Here it comes. The first betrayal of the marriage. Actually, Tristan, I said, my voice dripping with honeyed poison, my husband and I were just enjoying a private conversation. Whatever my father has to say, he can say it to me himself. And he can say it in front of Felix. We keep no secrets. Tristan's perfectly practiced smile faltered. His eyes widened a fraction. This was not the script. Jocelyn, it's quite urgent. Then spit it out, I countered, leaning my head onto Felix's shoulder. Felix went entirely rigid beneath me. God in heaven, she smells like jasmine. Felix's inner voice practically groaned, completely distracted from Tristan for a split second before returning to sharp suspicion. What game is she playing? Why is she brushing Tristan off? Tristan's face tightened. He clearly didn't know how to handle this deviation. Never mind, it can wait. Enjoy your evening. He spun on his heel and walked away, his posture stiff with anger. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I was holding. What was that? Felix asked aloud, looking down at me with profound suspicion. I was under the impression you and Belmont were close. People change, Felix, I said, looking up into his stormy eyes. Sometimes it takes a monumental event, like a wedding, to realize who actually has your back and who is just waiting to push you into the fire. Fire. I shuddered at my own words. Felix stared at me, searching my face for a lie. I want to believe her, his mind whispered softly. More than anything, I want to believe her. But I know about the poison. My blood ran cold. Poison? The ride back to the Dalton mansion was shrouded in silence. Rain had begun to streak the tinted windows of the Maybach. I sat processing the horrific word I had plucked from Felix's mind. Poison. He wasn't just paralyzed. Someone was actively poisoning him. The Dalton estate was a sprawling, Gothic-style mansion situated on a secluded cliff overlooking the ocean. As the staff opened the heavy oak doors, Martha, the head housekeeper, stood waiting. She was a stern woman with iron gray hair. In my previous life, she had treated me with absolute disdain, and rightfully so. I had been a nightmare. "Welcome home, Mr. Dalton." "Madam," Martha said stiffly, "I have prepared the guest suite in the east wing for you, madam, exactly as requested." In my past life, I had thrown a fit, demanding to sleep as far away from Felix as possible. "Thank you, Martha, but there's been a change of plans," I said clearly. "I will be staying in the master suite. With my husband." Martha's eyes widened, her professional mask slipping for a second. Felix abruptly stopped the motor of his wheelchair. He turned to look at me, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. "Jocelyn, there is no need for this charade. The staff is discreet. You don't have to pretend." "She can't stand the sight of my legs," his mind raced, self-loathing dripping from every unspoken syllable. "If she stays in my room, she'll see the lifts, the braces, the medications. She'll see how pathetic I really am. I won't let her pity me." "It's not a charade, Felix," I said softly, stepping in front of his wheelchair. I placed my hands on the armrests, leaning down to meet his eye level. "We are married. I belong by your side." "I require a great deal of medical assistance at night," he warned, his voice harsh, trying to push me away. "It is not a pleasant sight." "Then I will assist you," I replied firmly. I looked up at Martha. "Have my things moved to the master suite immediately." Martha hesitated, looking at Felix for confirmation. After a long, agonizing silence, Felix gave a curt nod. Once we were alone in the sprawling, dimly lit master suite, the reality of the situation settled in. The room was dominated by a massive king-sized bed, but the real focal point was the array of medical equipment tucked discreetly into a side alcove. Felix propelled himself toward the edge of the bed. He looked exhausted. "Dr. Gregory should be here soon to administer my evening injection," Felix thought, rubbing his temples. "My chest feels tight again. The heart palpitations are getting worse. Gregory says it's a side effect of the paralysis, but I know my own body. He's dosing me with something heavy, a slow-acting cardiotoxin. Tristan Belmont's payroll runs deep." My heart plummeted into my stomach. Felix knew his doctor was poisoning him? Why would he let him? If I expose Gregory now, Tristan will just find another way. A faster way, Felix's thoughts continued, bleak and resigned. At least with Gregory, I know the timeline. I have maybe a year left before my heart gives out. That's enough time to secure the company's assets in a blind trust for Jocelyn. Once I'm dead, Tristan won't have any leverage over her, and she'll be safe with the money. She'll be free. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. I had to turn away, pretending to admire a painting on the wall so he wouldn't see me cry. He was letting himself be murdered slowly, to buy time to secure my financial future. A future for a woman who, in his mind, was actively conspiring against him. The sheer devastating weight of his love for me was suffocating. I didn't deserve a fraction of it. But God had sent me back, and I was going to use this second chance to tear his enemies limb from limb. There was a soft knock at the door. "Mr. Dalton, it's Dr. Gregory." A tall, thin man with wire-rimmed glasses stepped into the room, carrying a black leather medical bag. He offered me a polite, sickeningly fake smile. "Ah, the new bride. Congratulations, Mrs. Dalton. I just need a few moments to administer Mr. Dalton's evening muscle relaxants and neurological supplements." "Of course," I said, plastering on a pleasant smile. "Actually, doctor, I'm quite interested in my husband's care. I'd like to learn how to administer his medications myself." Dr. Gregory froze. His eyes darted nervously to Felix, then back to me. "Oh, that's incredibly kind, Mrs. Dalton, but these compounds are quite complex. They require precise intravenous administration. It's best left to a professional." "I am a fast learner," I countered, taking a step closer to him. "She's persistent," Felix thought, watching me with intense curiosity. "What is she doing?" "I insist," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. I reached out and took the small glass vial Dr. Gregory had just pulled from his bag. It contained a clear, innocuous-looking liquid. "Mrs. Dalton, please hand that back," Dr. Gregory said, a slight tremor in his voice. "What exactly is in this, Dr. Gregory?" I asked, holding it up to the light. It's a proprietary blend of baclofen and nerve tonics," he stammered. I looked at Felix. He was watching the exchange intently, his jaw set. "Interesting," I murmured, "because my father's pharmaceutical company developed a very similar nerve tonic a few years ago. But we had to scrap it because in high doses, the synthetic compounds mimicked the effects of digitalis toxicity. It caused progressive heart failure." The color completely drained from Dr. Gregory's face. Felix sat up straighter, his eyes locking onto me. "How does she know that?" his mind echoed. "That file was classified. Tristan couldn't have given her that information." "I think," I said, stepping right into Dr. Gregory's personal space, "we are going to have a second opinion on this proprietary blend. In fact, I'm going to have the lab at my family's clinic run a full mass spectrometry on it tonight." "That is wildly unnecessary," Dr. Gregory snapped, reaching for the vial. I pulled my hand back and leveled him with a glare so venomous he shrank back. "If you try to take this from me, I will have security break both of your arms. Get out of my house." Dr. Gregory looked at Felix for help, but Felix just raised an eyebrow. "You heard my wife," Felix said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Get out." Dr. Gregory grabbed his bag and practically fled the room. The heavy silence returned, thicker than before. I stood there, holding the vial of poison that had been slowly killing the man I was learning to love. "Jocelyn," Felix finally said, his voice cracking slightly. "What was that?" I walked over to him, dropping the vial onto the bedside table. I knelt on the plush carpet right in front of his wheelchair. I placed my hands gently over his paralyzed knees, looking up into his face. "It means," I said, my voice trembling with fierce emotion, "that from this day forward, nobody touches you but me. Nobody feeds you. Nobody gives you medicine. And nobody hurts you. Not ever again." Felix stared at me, his chest heaving. His internal monologue had gone completely silent. For the first time all day, his mind was utterly, wonderfully quiet, shocked into submission by the truth. I leaned forward and pressed my forehead against his knee. "I am going to save you, Felix, I promise. I am happy to continue this story for you. Here are parts 4 and 5, diving deeper into the betrayal and the twists of Felix's condition. The morning after our wedding, the Dalton Master Suite was thick with an uneasy, crackling tension. Sunlight filtered through the heavy silk drapes, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I awoke on the far right side of the massive king bed, the cold, empty space between Felix and me feeling like a physical canyon. I turned my head. He was already awake, staring at the ceiling. His profile was carved from marble, rigid and unyielding. "She stayed," his inner voice murmured, a mixture of profound relief and agonizing suspicion echoing in my mind. She actually stayed in my bed. She didn't flinch when I needed help transferring from the chair last night. But why? Belmont must have threatened her family's company if she didn't play the perfect doting wife. She's just a prisoner here. I sat up, ignoring the sting of his thoughts. I couldn't blame him for his paranoia. The Jocelyn of the past had given him every reason to expect the worst. But today was the beginning of my counteroffensive. I grabbed the small glass vial I had confiscated from Dr. Gregory the night before. I slipped it into my designer handbag and walked into the opulent ensuite bathroom to dress. When I emerged, wearing a tailored charcoal pantsuit, Felix was watching me intently. "Where are you going?" he asked aloud, his vocal tone flat and authoritative. "I have an errand to run in the city," I replied smoothly, walking over to the bedside table to pour him a glass of ice water. "I should be back before noon." "She's going to see Tristan," his mind immediately concluded, a wave of dark, suffocating grief washing over the telepathic connection. "She has the vial. She's going to hand it over to him so they can figure out a faster way to kill me. Let her go, Felix. Let it end." I stopped, my hand trembling slightly as I set the water pitcher down. The sheer resignation in his thoughts broke my heart. I wanted to shake him, to scream that I was on his side, but words were cheap. I had to show him. I leaned down, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to his temple. He went completely rigid, his breath hitching. "I am going to a private laboratory," I whispered into his ear, completely subverting his expectations. "Do not let anyone from the staff give you so much as an aspirin while I am gone. I mean it, Felix." Before he could process the shock radiating through his mind, I walked out the door. My destination was Charles River Laboratories, a highly secure private biochemical testing facility on the outskirts of the city. I bypassed the front desk entirely, using my family's old corporate access credentials to reach the sub-level testing floors. I was looking for Valerie DuPont, one of the top toxicologists in the country, and a woman who owed my father her career. More importantly, she was someone Tristan didn't know existed. "Jocelyn?" Valerie gasped, pulling off her safety goggles as I stormed into her pristine stainless steel lab. "What are you doing here? I thought you were on your honeymoon in the Maldives." "Change of plans, Val," I said, locking the heavy fire door behind me. I pulled the vial from my bag and set it on the metal counter next to an Agilent 7890B gas chromatograph. "I need this analyzed. Immediately. Off the books. No digital records. No cloud uploads." Valerie's professional curiosity instantly took over. She grabbed a pipette and extracted a tiny drop of the clear liquid. "What exactly am I looking for?" Dr. Gregory called it a proprietary blend of baclofen and nerve tonics. "I suspect it's a slow-acting cardiotoxin," I explained, crossing my arms to hide my shaking hands. It took 2 agonizing hours of pacing the sterile lab before the machine finally spat out a printed spectral analysis. Valerie pulled the sheet of paper, her brow furrowing so deeply it formed a permanent V. She looked up at me, the color completely drained from her cheeks. "Jocelyn, where did you get this?" she asked, her voice dropping to a horrified whisper. "It's what my husband's doctor has been injecting into his spine every single night for the last 3 years," I replied, my stomach twisting into a heavy, sickening knot. "Is it going to stop his heart?" "Eventually, yes. There are traces of heavy metals here that would slowly calcify the cardiac valves," Valerie explained, pointing to the spikes on the graph. "But that's not the primary function of this compound. This is a highly concentrated, synthetic neuroinhibitor. It blocks the synaptic pathways in the lower lumbar region." I stared at her, my brain struggling to comprehend the gravity of her words. "Translate that for me, Val." Valerie took a deep breath. "Jocelyn, whoever is taking this, their paralysis isn't natural. If there was nerve damage from an accident, this chemical is actively preventing it from healing. In fact, it is chemically inducing the paralysis. If you stop administering this drug and flush the toxins from his system, he could walk again." I finished, the realization hitting me with the force of a freight train. Tristan and Cassandra hadn't just arranged for Felix to be slowly poisoned. They had orchestrated his entire disability. They had trapped a brilliant, powerful man inside his own body to strip him of his authority and slowly bleed his empire dry. The sheer psychopathic cruelty of it took my breath away. "I need a detox protocol," I demanded, my voice cold and hard as steel. "I need to know exactly how to flush this out of his system safely, and I need the supplies today." By the time I returned to the Dalton estate, the sky had bruised into a dark, violent purple threatening rain. I practically sprinted past Martha in the foyer, my arms loaded with 2 heavy paper bags from a private pharmacy. I threw open the doors to the master suite. Felix was still in his wheelchair, positioned by the massive bay windows, staring out at the crashing ocean waves. 3 hours, his inner voice counted, heavy with a bitter, cynical defeat. "She's been gone 3 hours. They're probably at the Ritz-Carlton right now, celebrating how easily I fell for her little act this morning. She's probably laughing at me." "Felix," I said, dropping the bags onto the bed. He didn't turn around. "Did you enjoy your morning in the city, Jocelyn? I trust your errands were fruitful." His spoken voice was dripping with icy sarcasm. I walked over to him, grabbing the handles of his wheelchair and forcibly turning him to face me. He glared up at me, his gray eyes flashing with raw, untempered anger. "More fruitful than you could ever imagine," I said, dropping to my knees in front of him. I pulled the printed spectral analysis from my jacket pocket and shoved it into his hands. "Read it." Felix frowned, his eyes scanning the complex chemical breakdowns and the highlighted summary at the bottom. The silence in the room grew deafening. I listened closely to his mind, waiting for the exact moment the truth shattered his preconceived notions. "Neuroinhibitor?" His mind echoed, the thought sharp and confused. "Chemically induced motor failure? What is this? This can't be real. If this is true, then my legs. My spine." "You aren't permanently paralyzed, Felix," I said, my voice trembling with unshed tears. "Dr. Gregory wasn't just weakening your heart, he was actively keeping you in that chair. The paralysis is a symptom of the poison." Felix dropped the paper. His hands were shaking violently. He looked at me, a wild, desperate hope warring with deeply ingrained paranoia. "Why are you showing me this, Tristan?" "Tristan is a monster," I interrupted fiercely, grabbing his shaking hands and pressing them to my cheeks. "I am not working with him, Felix. I am working to destroy him. And I need you to trust me, because the withdrawal from this chemical is going to be pure hell, and I am the only one who can get you through it." "She knows," his internal voice realized, the protective walls he had built around his heart finally cracking down the middle. "She actually went to a lab. She figured it out. She's trying to save me." Before he could say another word, my cell phone chimed from my purse. The screen lit up with a text message. "Tristan, did you get the access codes for the Dalton offshore accounts? The board meets on Friday. We need to move the assets to Credit Suisse tonight. Meet me at the usual spot." Felix's sharp eyes caught the notification, his body tensed, the fragile trust we had just built instantly evaporating. "There it is," he thought, his mental voice turning to ash. "The real agenda. She's just playing both sides. She gives me hope with one hand and steals my legacy with the other." "Read the text," Felix commanded coldly aloud. "Go ahead, Jocelyn. Let's not keep your handler waiting." I sighed, picking up the phone. I didn't hide the screen from him. "He wants the access codes to your offshore accounts at Credit Suisse." "And I assume you have them?" he asked, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched near his ear. "Of course I do," I said calmly. "I copied them from your private safe last night while you were sleeping." Felix physically recoiled as if I had struck him. Fool. I am a complete fool. She played me flawlessly, and I am going to give them to him, I continued, ignoring his mental anguish. I pulled a sleek silver USB drive from my pocket. But I spent 3 hours last night working with a private hacker I hired out of Berlin. This drive doesn't contain your actual financial routing numbers. It contains a highly aggressive, self-replicating ransomware worm disguised as an encrypted ledger. Felix blinked, staring at me in stunned silence. When Tristan plugs this into his computer to transfer your funds to his dummy accounts, I explained, a dark, vindictive smile spreading across my face, the worm will activate. It will bypass his firewalls, access his personal portfolio, and systematically drain every single cent he possesses into an untraceable crypto wallet. It will also forward his private emails regarding drfaye-com. Gregory directly to the FBI Cybercrimes Division. Felix's mouth parted slightly in shock. She weaponized my financial records? His mind stammered, completely overwhelmed. She's not a traitor. She's a Trojan horse. She's going to slaughter him. I am going to meet him right now, I said, standing up and smoothing my jacket. I will be back in exactly 1 hour. We begin the detox protocol tonight. I didn't wait for his permission. I grabbed the USB drive and walked out, leaving him sitting in the quiet aftermath of the storm I had just unleashed. The meeting with Tristan took place in the dimly lit, exclusive lounge of the Sovereign Hotel. He was sitting in a leather booth, nursing a martini, looking entirely too smug. "You're late, Jocelyn," he reprimanded, though his eyes lit up with greed when he saw me approach. "Tell me you have it." I slid into the booth across from him, keeping my expression perfectly schooled into a mask of nervous compliance. It wasn't easy. He's paranoid. He almost caught me opening the safe. "But you got it," Tristan pressed, leaning forward. I placed the silver USB drive on the mahogany table between us. Every account, the routing numbers, the passwords, the Cayman Island shell companies, it's all there. Tristan snatched the drive, a cruel, victorious smirk twisting his handsome face. "You've done perfectly, my love. By tomorrow morning, Felix Dalton will be a penniless cripple, and we will be on a private jet to Monaco. Just make sure his company falls to you, Tristan," I played along, fighting the urge to vomit at his term of endearment. "I don't want to spend another minute in that house playing nurse." "You won't have to," Tristan promised, pocketing the drive. I left the lounge without another word, my heart pounding a steady rhythm of impending victory. When I returned to the master suite, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Felix was no longer by the window. He was sitting beside the bed, holding the printout from the lab. He looked up as I entered, his stormy gray eyes searching mine with a vulnerability that stripped away all his armor. "Did you do it?" he asked softly. "He took the bait," I confirmed, dropping my bag and walking toward him. "His empire will crumble by sunrise." Felix looked down at his useless legs. "She did it for me. She risked everything for me. God, what have I done to deserve a woman like this?" Suddenly, Felix let out a sharp, agonizing hiss, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. His face went completely pale, beads of sweat breaking out on his forehead. "Felix!" I panicked, dropping to my knees beside him. "What is it? Is it your heart?" My legs, he ground out, his teeth gritted in immense pain. I looked down. For the first time in 3 years, the muscle in his left thigh was violently, undeniably twitching. The withdrawal had begun, and beneath the agony, the dead nerves were finally waking up. The human body is not designed to wake up all at once. For 3 years, the synthetic neuroinhibitor doctor, Gregory pumped into Felix's spine, had built a chemical dam, starving his lower extremities of every electrical impulse. Now, with the first dose of Valerie's aggressive chelation therapy flowing through a makeshift IV, I had tapped into his arm. That dam was violently breaking. Felix's head snapped back against the headboard, his jaw locking as a guttural groan tore from his throat. The muscles in his calves, dormant for over 1,000 days, began to spasm uncontrollably. "Breathe, Felix. Look at me," I commanded, my hands pressing firmly against his quivering thighs. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, his body temperature spiking as his immune system went into overdrive to flush the heavy metals and toxins out of his bloodstream. It feels like my marrow is boiling, his inner voice screamed, a frantic, echoing sound that made my own head ache in sympathy. I can't let her see me cry. I am a Dalton. I can't be weak. God, make it stop. Please, just let me pass out. You are not weak, I whispered fiercely, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead with a damp cloth. I didn't care if responding to his thoughts directly was risky. He needed an anchor. You survived 3 years of deliberate poisoning. You survived Tristan. You can survive tonight. Felix cracked his eyes open, the stormy gray irises dilated with agony. He stared at me, his chest heaving. She's looking at me like I'm a man, not a patient, not a corpse. She's fighting for me. I spent the next 6 hours in the trenches of his withdrawal. When the spasms threatened to throw him from the mattress, I climbed into the bed, wrapping my arms around his broad torso, using my own body weight to ground him. He buried his face in my shoulder, his fingers digging into the silk sheets until his knuckles bled. The opulent master suite felt more like a battlefield bunker. At 3:15 a.m., the encrypted burner phone in my pocket vibrated. I carefully untangled myself from Felix, who had finally slipped into a restless, feverish doze. I pulled out the device. It was a secure message from Klaus, the underground penetration tester I had hired out of Berlin. Klaus, payload delivered. The worm bypassed the Credit Suisse secondary firewall 10 minutes ago. Tristan Belmont plugged the drive into his personal MacBook Pro. He practically invited me into his mainframe, initiating complete asset liquidation. By 6 a.m. EST, his net worth will be exactly $0. A cold, dark satisfaction settled deep in my bones. Tristan had burned me alive for money. Now, I was burning his entire world to the ground with a few lines of code. Jocelyn, what about the emails? Klaus, intercepted and decrypted. I found 7 threads between Belmont and Dr. Gregory discussing dosage adjustments for the Dalton problem, forwarding the entire cache to the SEC tip line and the FBI cyber division now. Grab some popcorn, Mrs. Dalton. The morning news is going to be spectacular. I deleted the thread, snapped the burner phone in half, and tossed it into the roaring fireplace. When I turned back to the bed, Felix was awake. The violent tremors had subsided into a dull, rhythmic twitching in his left foot. He was staring down at his legs, his breathing shallow. "Felix?" I asked softly, stepping closer. Slowly, agonizingly, he shifted his gaze to me. "I can feel the sheets," his mind whispered, the thought so fragile it felt like spun glass. "The silk. It's cold against my ankles. I can feel the weight of the blanket. I'm not numb anymore." Tears, hot and fast, spilled over my eyelashes. I rushed to the side of the bed, dropping to my knees. "Can you move them?" Felix squeezed his eyes shut in intense concentration. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. For a long, breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, ever so slightly, his right knee bent, dragging his heel an inch across the mattress. A ragged sob tore from his throat. He covered his face with his hands, his broad shoulders shaking as 3 years of repressed grief, humiliation, and despair finally broke out of him. I didn't hesitate. I climbed back onto the bed and pulled him into my arms, letting him weep into my collarbone. "She gave me my life back," his inner voice chanted, a reverent, overwhelming litany of devotion. "I will give her the world. I will burn down the sun if she asks for it. She is my wife. My fierce, beautiful wife. I've got you," I murmured, stroking his dark hair. "I've got you, and I am never letting you go." Morning broke over the Dalton estate with the crisp, golden light of absolute victory. The storm had passed, leaving a sky of unbroken, brilliant blue. I was sitting in a velvet armchair in the corner of the room, sipping a cup of black coffee. Felix was asleep, his chest rising and falling in a deep, restorative rhythm. The heavy, gray pallor that had clung to his skin for years was gone, replaced by a healthy, flushed vitality. I picked up the television remote and flicked on the flat screen mounted above the fireplace, muting the volume. I switched the channel to Bloomberg News. There it was. The breaking news ticker at the bottom of the screen read in bold, crimson letters: Belmont Holdings CO implicated in massive wire fraud. Federal agents raid Manhattan headquarters. The screen showed aerial footage of the FBI swarming Tristan's towering glass corporate building. The anchors were frantically reporting that billions of dollars in offshore assets had vanished overnight, and newly leaked documents pointed to a horrifying conspiracy involving medical malpractice and attempted murder of a rival CEO. I smiled, taking a slow sip of my coffee. Checkmate. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the master suite rattled. "You cannot go in there, miss. Madam gave explicit instructions." Martha's panicked voice echoed from the hallway. "Get your hands off me, you old bat. Jocelyn. Jocelyn, open this door." It was Cassandra. Her voice was shrill, laced with an absolute, unhinged panic. Felix stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at the television, then toward the door, his sharp mind instantly assessing the situation. "Cassandra, she's tied to Belmont's shell companies. If he goes down, she loses her trust fund and her freedom." "Let her in, Martha," I called out, my voice cool and even. The door burst open. Cassandra stumbled into the room. The pristine, calculating bridesmaid from yesterday was gone. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her makeup was smeared under her eyes, and she clutched her Hermes Birkin bag like a life preserver. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me sitting calmly with my coffee, and Felix lying in the bed, looking very much alive. "Jocelyn," Cassandra gasped, her chest heaving. "Jocelyn, you have to help me. Tristan's accounts are frozen. The FBI is at his penthouse. My offshore trust was linked to his Credit Suisse account, and now it's completely gone. Did you give him the wrong USB?" "I gave him exactly what he deserved," I said, not moving an inch. Cassandra's eyes widened, a horrific realization dawning on her face. You set him up? Are you insane? If he goes down, he's going to drag us with him? He's going to tell them about the poison, Jocelyn. He's going to tell them we paid Dr. Gregory." She had just confessed. On tape. I casually reached into the pocket of my blazer and tapped the glowing red circle on my phone's voice memo app, stopping the recording. "There is no we, Cassandra," I said, standing up. "There is only you and Tristan, and you just gave me the final piece of evidence I needed to hand you over to the feds." Cassandra's face contorted into a mask of pure, venomous rage. "You stupid little bitch," she spat, reaching into her Birkin bag. "You think you can cross us? Tristan warned me you were acting strange. If I'm going to prison, I'm making sure you never get to enjoy Felix's money." She pulled out a small, silver snub-nosed revolver, aiming it directly at my chest. My heart stopped. I had planned for the financial ruin. I hadn't planned for Cassandra to become a desperate, cornered animal. "No!" Felix's mind roared, a sound so deafening it practically brought me to my knees. Before Cassandra could even cock the hammer of the gun, a heavy crystal Scotch decanter flew across the room, shattering directly against the side of her head. Cassandra screamed, dropping the gun as she collapsed to the carpet, clutching her bleeding temple. I spun around. Felix was no longer in the bed. He was standing. His legs were trembling violently, his knuckles white as he gripped the heavy wooden bedpost for support, but he was on his feet. He towered over the room, a magnificent, terrifying titan of fury. His chest was heaving, his eyes locked on Cassandra with a murderous intensity that made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. "If you ever," Felix growled, his actual voice rumbling like a fault line snapping, "point a weapon at my wife again, I will not bother calling the police. I will bury you under this estate myself." Martha, who had been hovering in the hallway, let out a shocked gasp and immediately lunged forward, kicking the revolver out of Cassandra's reach before pinning the weeping woman to the floor. "I am calling estate security, sir," Martha yelled, completely abandoning her usual stiff decorum. I couldn't breathe. I stared at Felix, my hands covering my mouth. He was standing. He had thrown that decanter with pinpoint precision, driven entirely by the adrenaline of protecting me. Slowly, Felix turned his gaze to me. His legs finally gave out, but I was already there. I caught him, bearing his weight as we sank down to the edge of the mattress together. I couldn't let her hurt you, his mind whispered, exhaustion pulling at his consciousness. I stood up for you, Jocelyn. I stood up. You did, I cried, wrapping my arms around his neck, burying my face in his chest. You did it, Felix. They're done. We're safe. As the distant sound of police sirens began to wail up the winding coastal road toward the estate, I listened to the steady, strong beating of my husband's heart. The life I had known was ashes, but from those ashes we had built an empire of our own. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers painted the Dalton mansion in erratic, dizzying strokes. Two heavily armed officers hauled Cassandra down the grand sweeping staircase in handcuffs. She looked nothing like a socialite anymore. Her mascara ran in thick, black rivers down her cheeks, and she was shrieking obscenities that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. I stood at the top of the stairs, Felix's heavy arm draped securely over my shoulders. He was breathing hard, leaning most of his weight against me, but he refused to sit back down in that chair. He watched Cassandra being shoved into the back of a squad car with an expression of absolute, glacial indifference. Tristan's favorite pawn, his mind observed, the thought crisp and analytical, free of the muddy despair that had clouded him for years. She'll roll on him before they even reach the precinct. Belmont is entirely finished. And Jocelyn. God. Jocelyn orchestrated the entire execution. He turned his head to look at me, his stormy gray eyes softening into something so profoundly warm it made my breath hitch. You're shivering, he said softly, his actual voice rumbling near my ear. Just adrenaline, I lied, though my hands were trembling. The reality of what had just happened, what could have happened if Felix hadn't found the superhuman strength to stand, was crashing down on me. Over the next 4 weeks, the Dalton estate transformed from a mausoleum into a sanctuary of aggressive recovery. I moved Valerie's detox protocol into a supervised private wing, hiring a team of elite, vetted physical therapists. The withdrawal from Dr. Gregory's synthetic neuroinhibitor was brutal. There were nights Felix would wake up screaming, his leg muscles cramping so violently it felt as though his bones were snapping. But I never left his side. I bathed him. I held his hand through the agonizing deep tissue massages, and I read to him when the insomnia set in. Slowly, the telepathic connection I shared with him began to shift. The constant stream of paranoid, self-loathing thoughts dissolved. Instead, I heard a man rebuilding his soul. She is exhausted, he would think, watching me trace patterns on his chest as we lay in bed. She gave up her honeymoon to play nurse to a man she was forced to marry, but she doesn't flinch. She looks at my scars like they are battle wounds. I am going to give her a life so magnificent she will never remember the fire she walked through to get here. The fire. He didn't know how literal that thought was. I had been burned alive by the very people he was now helping me destroy. By the 5th week, Tristan Belmont's empire had officially been reduced to dust. Klaus's ransomware had triggered a domino effect. The SEC had seized Belmont Holdings, uncovering massive fraud, illegal offshore tax evasion, and the paper trail leading directly to Dr. Gregory. Tristan was denied bail, sitting in a federal holding cell, awaiting a trial that would undoubtedly sentence him to life in prison. But dealing with Tristan wasn't our final battle. Dalton Industries had been bleeding internally for years, mismanaged by a board of directors who thought Felix was a weak, dying figurehead. The chief instigator was Maxwell Montgomery, the vice chairman. Maxwell was a shrewd, ruthless corporate shark who had secretly been in Tristan's pocket, greasing the wheels from the inside. With Tristan gone, Maxwell panicked. He called for an emergency shareholder meeting, intending to invoke a medical proxy clause to formally strip Felix of his CEO title, citing permanent physical and mental incapacitation. Maxwell's plan was to liquidate Dalton's highly profitable biotech division to cover his own embezzled tracks before the FBI auditors realized he was tied to Tristan. "You aren't going to that meeting," I told Felix on a Tuesday morning, adjusting the lapels of my sleek, crimson blazer. Felix was seated on the edge of our bed. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. Beside him rested a custom-made, silver-handled cane. His legs were still weak, requiring rigorous daily therapy, but the paralysis was completely broken. I am not letting her walk into a room full of wolves by herself, his mind growled stubbornly. I am the legal proxy, Felix, I reminded him aloud, kissing his forehead. I have the financial ledgers Klaus pulled. I have Valerie's toxicology reports. I am going to fillet Maxwell Montgomery in front of the entire board. Maxwell is dangerous, Jocelyn. He's cornered, Felix warned, his jaw ticking. So am I replied, my eyes flashing with a fierce, reborn light. Trust me. Felix stared at me for a long moment. She is a hurricane, his inner voice marveled. Fine, let them see her fury, but I will not be far behind. The glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor of the Dalton Tower was suffocatingly quiet when I walked in. 15 of the most powerful executives in the city sat around the massive mahogany table. At the head of the table sat Maxwell Montgomery, looking insufferably smug in a gray pinstripe suit. Mrs. Dalton, Maxwell sneered as I took the seat directly to his right, leaving the chairman's chair empty. How touching of you to join us. Though I must admit, this is a board meeting, not a charity gala. We are here to discuss the unfortunate reality of your husband's declining health. My husband's health is none of your concern, Maxwell, I stated coldly, dropping a thick leather binder onto the table. The executives murmured among themselves. On the contrary, it is the concern of every shareholder in this room, Maxwell countered, standing up. He projected a slide onto the screen behind him, showing plummeting stock projections. For 3 years, Felix Dalton has been an absentee CEO. He is bound to a wheelchair, heavily medicated, and completely unfit to lead. I am invoking Article 4 of the Corporate Charter, a vote of no confidence. You invoke nothing, I snapped, my voice ringing out like a gunshot. I opened the binder. Before anyone votes, I suggest you look at the documents I've just placed on the secure server. Specifically, the wire transfers from Belmont Holdings into Maxwell Montgomery's private Cayman Island accounts. Maxwell's smug expression faltered. A drop of sweat materialized on his brow. This is absurd. You are a grieving, hysterical woman fabricating evidence. Am I fabricating the fact that you authorized the sale of our biotech patents to Tristan Belmont for pennies on the dollar? I pushed, standing up to meet his gaze. Am I fabricating the emails between you and Dr. Gregory, ensuring Felix's medication dosage was increased? The room erupted into chaos. Executives began pulling up the files on their tablets, their faces draining of color as the undeniable proof of Maxwell's treason stared back at them. Security, Maxwell shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Remove this woman immediately. She has no authority here. Actually, Maxwell, a deep, resonant, and achingly familiar voice echoed from the back of the room. She has absolute authority. She speaks for me. The heavy oak doors swung wide open. The entire room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Felix Dalton stood in the doorway. He wasn't in the matte black wheelchair. He wasn't hunched over or looking frail. He stood tall, a towering monument of power and vengeance, leaning casually on his silver-handled cane. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his gray eyes sweeping across the terrified board members like a reaper calculating his harvest. Look at them. Felix's voice echoed in my mind, dark and thoroughly amused. They look like they've seen a ghost. They thought they buried me. They forgot I thrive in the dark. Maxwell stumbled backward, his knee hitting his chair. Felix, how? Felix took a slow, deliberate step into the room, then another. Every strike of his cane against the floor sounded like a judge's gavel sealing their doom. He walked the entire length of the boardroom, his gaze never leaving Maxwell's trembling face. You thought you could poison me in my own home, Felix said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that commanded absolute submission. You thought you could ally yourself with Tristan Belmont and strip my empire for parts. But you made one fatal miscalculation, Maxwell. Felix stopped directly beside me. He didn't look at the board, he looked down at me. his eyes filled with a love so profound it made my heart ache. "You underestimated my wife," Felix finished. He turned his attention back to the room. "Maxwell Montgomery, you are fired. The police are waiting for you in the lobby. As for the rest of you, anyone who voted for this proxy will hand in their resignation by the end of the hour, or my lawyers will bankrupt your families for the next 3 generations. Meeting adjourned." It was a bloodbath. Within minutes, the room was empty, save for Maxwell being escorted out by building security, weeping openly about a plea deal. The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving Felix and me completely alone in the sprawling boardroom overlooking the city skyline. I let out a breathless laugh, the adrenaline finally crashing. Well, that was certainly one way to make a comeback. Felix dropped his cane. It clattered against the mahogany table. He took the final 2 steps toward me entirely unassisted, wrapping his strong arms around my waist and pulling me flush against his chest. "I am never letting her go. She is the air in my lungs. She is my entire world," his mind chanted, a beautiful, overwhelming symphony. "You don't have to shout it in your head, you know," I whispered, resting my hands on his broad shoulders. Felix froze. He pulled back slightly, his gray eyes widening in utter shock. "What did you just say?" I smiled, tears pricking my eyes. I said, "I know. I've known since the day we got married. I heard every doubt, every fear, and every single time you told yourself you didn't deserve me." Felix stared at me, his brilliant mind racing to connect the dots. The sudden change in my behavior, my knowledge of the poison, my absolute certainty in his innocence. "She heard me?" he thought, completely stunned. "She heard everything?" "Everything," I confirmed aloud, tracing his jawline. "And you were wrong, Felix. You deserve all of it. You deserve a life, you deserve this empire, and you deserve me." Felix didn't say another word. He didn't think another thought. His mind finally went completely, blissfully quiet as he leaned down and captured my lips in a kiss that tasted like victory, survival, and a love that had literally defied death. The journey from the ashes of a burning warehouse to the pinnacle of Dalton Industries was a crucible that forged an unbreakable bond. The telepathic connection that allowed me to hear Felix's inner thoughts eventually faded as his body fully healed, and our verbal communication replaced the need for supernatural intervention. Tristan and Cassandra were sentenced to federal prison, their names erased from the elite circles they so desperately clung to. Felix not only learned to walk again, but stepped into his role as a titan of industry with a newfound empathy and unmatched ferocity, always keeping me by his side as his equal. I was given a terrifying second chance at life, armed with the knowledge of a brutal future. But by rewriting destiny, I didn't just save myself from the fire. I saved a man who loved me loudly in the silence of his own mind, proving that the ultimate revenge is a beautifully lived life.